Before we go any further, I want you to pause for a second, just one honest second. No distractions, no scrolling, just you and this question. When was the last time you chose yourself, truly chose yourself, without apologizing for it? When was the last time you didn't shrink your voice to keep somebody comfortable? When was the last time you walked away from something that hurt, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally cared about yourself more? If you're struggling to remember, you're exactly where you need to be right now, because this isn't just another self-help talk that tells you to love yourself and leaves you with nothing but a pretty quote. This is a conversation nobody had with you when you needed it most. This is a friend who grabs your hand and says, "Hey, I see what you've been doing, and it's time to stop." Let me tell you something that might sting a little. You've been calling it love. You've been calling it patience. You've been calling it fighting for the relationship. But somewhere underneath all that grace you kept handing out like free samples, you knew the truth. You were begging, not on your knees. No, it was subtler than that. It looked like sending that double text even when your gut told you to wait. It looked like rehearsing your words 40 times before you spoke, terrified of saying the wrong thing. It looked like forgiving someone before they even asked, just so they wouldn't leave. It looked like shrinking yourself into a size that fit someone else's comfort zone while your own soul suffocated. And the worst part? You thought that was strength. You thought holding on through all the silence, the mixed signals, the half-hearted effort, you thought enduring that made you loyal. But loyalty to someone who doesn't value your presence is just self-destruction wearing a noble mask. Here's what I want you to understand before we go deeper. Wanting love is not the problem. Craving connection is not the flaw. The wound is this. Somewhere along the way, you started believing that you had to earn the right to be loved, that just being you, unpolished, unfiltered, unadjusted you, wasn't quite enough. So you kept adding more patience, more understanding, more sacrifice, more silence. And with every addition, you subtracted a piece of yourself. This audiobook is going to walk you through the most important journey you'll ever take, the road back to yourself. Not the version of you that performs for approval, not the version that dims its light to make others comfortable. The real one, the one who existed before you, learned that love was something to chase. Throughout these chapters, you will understand why trading your dignity for attention is the most expensive bargain you'll ever make. You'll learn how childhood wiring created patterns you never chose. You'll discover the difference between attachment and genuine love. You'll find out why abandoning yourself became your default survival strategy and how to unlearn it. You'll learn how to be alone without falling apart, how to feel your emotions without being kidnapped by them, how to stop pouring yourself empty to prove your worth, how to build boundaries without guilt, how to choose yourself without shame, and ultimately, how to stop chasing love and start letting it find you. This is not about becoming heartless. It's about becoming whole. Because when you stop begging for love, you don't lose connection. You gain something far more rare. You gain yourself back. So let's begin. And let's begin honestly. Chapter 1. The Hidden Cost of Chasing Love. Nobody teaches you what begging for love actually looks like. We imagine it as something dramatic, crying on the floor, sending desperate messages at 3 in the morning, pleading with someone not to walk out the door. And sure, sometimes it looks like that, but most of the time, it's invisible. It's the quiet negotiation you run inside your head before speaking. It's the way you monitor someone's tone like a weather forecast, adjusting your entire day based on how warm or cold they seem. It's the "it's fine" you say when your chest is tight and your eyes are burning. It's the way you keep your phone close, refreshing, waiting, hoping for a notification that tells you you're still wanted. You probably don't call it begging. You call it caring deeply. You call it being emotionally available. You call it not giving up on someone. But here's the thing. When your peace of mind depends on another person's response, you're no longer loving them. You're leasing your happiness, and they hold the contract. Think of it like a garden. Imagine you've been watering someone else's flowers every single day. Rain or shine, exhausted or energized, you show up with your watering can. But your own garden, it's dry. The soil is cracked. The flowers you once planted for yourself have wilted because all your water went somewhere else. And the painful irony is this: the garden you've been watering so devotedly, the owner barely notices. They didn't ask you to water it. They assume someone who gives that freely must have plenty to spare. They never saw the drought behind your generosity. That is what chasing love does. It empties you while creating the illusion that you're full. And here's the deeper wound. When you chase love, you unconsciously hand over the most sacred thing you own, your sense of self-worth. You place it in someone else's hands like a fragile glass ornament and say, "Here, hold this for me. Be careful." But people are clumsy with things they didn't ask to carry. They set it down. They forget about it. And when it falls, you don't blame them. You blame yourself for being too fragile. Chasing love teaches your body a dangerous rhythm. It trains your nervous system to associate peace with external validation. A kind message and your whole body relaxes. Silence and your stomach drops. A compliment and you breathe again. A cold response and the ground disappears beneath you. You become an emotional thermostat controlled by someone else's hand. And that is not love. That is captivity dressed in affection. The real cost of chasing love isn't just emotional exhaustion. It's identity erosion. Slowly, without noticing, you stop asking yourself what you want and start asking what they want. You stop wearing what makes you feel alive and start wearing what you think they'll find attractive. You stop voicing opinions that might cause friction. You become a chameleon, beautiful in your adaptability, but lost in your own reflection. You look in the mirror and wonder, who's staring back? And here's what nobody tells you about chasing. It rarely catches anything real. Think about it honestly. Has anyone ever truly, deeply loved you because you chased hard enough? Or did the deepest connections in your life happen when you were simply being yourself, unguarded, unperformed, just present? People don't fall in love with effort. They fall in love with essence. And your essence gets buried every time you mold yourself to fit someone else's frame. The most heartbreaking part of all this is what happens to your inner voice. You know that quiet knowing inside you, the one that whispers, "This doesn't feel right." Every time you override it, Every time you silence it to keep the peace, it gets a little quieter, until one day you can't hear it at all. And without that voice, you're navigating life without a compass. You accept crumbs and call them meals. You tolerate coldness and call it space. You endure neglect and call it independence, all because the inner voice that was supposed to protect you has been muted by your own hand. But here's the good news. That voice never dies. It's just waiting for you to get still enough, honest enough, brave enough to listen again. The moment you stop chasing is the moment power returns to where it belongs, inside you. Not power over others, power over your own choices. The power to say, I deserve better than this, and mean it. The power to sit in silence without grumbling. The power to let someone walk away without running after them. This kind of power doesn't roar. It doesn't prove itself. It simply stands. And standing, without performing, without begging, without shrinking, is the most revolutionary thing you can do. Chapter 2. The roots you didn't plant, where your need for approval was born. If you've ever sat across from someone who treated you like an option and still couldn't bring yourself to leave, you need to hear this. That inability to walk away isn't about them. It isn't about the current relationship at all. The roots go much deeper. Back to a kitchen table, a childhood bedroom, a schoolyard, a moment you probably don't even consciously remember. Before you ever learned what romance was, you learned what love felt like. And for many of us, love felt conditional. It felt like a performance review. It felt like walking on thin ice, testing each step, hoping it would hold. You learned early that certain versions of you were accepted and others were not. The loud version, too much. The emotional version, too sensitive. The needy version, too demanding. So you edited yourself, not because you wanted to, but because survival required it. Think of yourself as a radio. As a child, you were constantly adjusting your frequency, trying to match the station your parents, your caregivers, your environment were tuned to. You learned which frequency got static and which one got a signal. And whichever frequency earned you warmth, attention, or simply the absence of conflict, that became your default setting. Maybe your default setting was being the helper, the quiet one, the easy child, the peacemaker, the comedian who deflected tension with humor. Whatever it was, you wore it so long it stopped feeling like a costume. It became your skin. And now, decades later, you're still broadcasting on that same frequency, wondering why connection feels so exhausting. The hunger for validation isn't a character flaw, it's a survival adaptation. Your nervous system learned a very specific equation early on. Approval equals safety. When someone is pleased with you, your body relaxes. When someone withdraws attention, your body panics. This isn't dramatic or exaggerated. It is literally how your wiring works. Imagine a smoke alarm that goes off every time someone burns toast. The alarm isn't broken. It's just overly calibrated because it learned from a house that had real fires. Your need for validation is that alarm. It was installed during a time when emotional danger was real. The problem is, it's still going off in situations that aren't dangerous. A delayed text, a friend who's simply busy, a partner who needs space. Your body reads all of it as threat. This is why reassurance never quite fills the hole. You can hear someone say, I love you, and feel calm for 20 minutes, before the anxiety creeps back. You can receive praise and still lie awake wondering if they meant it. You can be held and still feel alone, because the wound isn't about what's happening now. It's about what happened then. And no amount of external reassurance can heal an internal fracture. Here's something important to understand. This doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. You adapted to survive an emotional environment you didn't choose. That adaptation was intelligent. That child who learned to read moods, anticipate needs, and become whatever the room required. That child was brilliant. But the strategy that saved you then is suffocating you now. The shift begins when you recognize the difference between past and present. When that familiar wave of anxiety hits, the tightness in your throat, the racing thoughts, the urge to reach out for confirmation, you can learn to pause, not suppress, not ignore, just pause. And in that pause, you remind yourself, this feeling is familiar, but I am not in danger. I am safe. This is old, not current. That single act, separating past wiring from present reality, is one of the most powerful things you'll ever do. Because every time you soothe yourself, instead of outsourcing that job to someone else, you rewire the pattern. You teach your nervous system a new equation. I can provide my own safety. I don't need to perform for it. I don't need to earn it. It's already mine. This doesn't happen overnight. You spent years, maybe decades, running on the old operating system. Expecting it to update in a week is like expecting a river to change direction because you asked politely. But rivers do change direction, slowly, persistently, through consistent pressure over time. And so will you. As you begin to self-validate, something beautiful and terrifying happens. You start to notice who in your life was only comfortable with the performing version of you. Some people will feel confused by your changes. Some will feel threatened. Some will accuse you of being distant, cold, different. And they're right. You are different. But different doesn't mean wrong. It means you've outgrown a role that was never supposed to be permanent. The child who scanned every room for danger deserves rest. The teenager who twisted into knots to be liked deserves peace. The adult who is still chasing approval from people who barely notice deserves to come home to themselves. And that's what this chapter is really about. Coming home. Not to a place, not to a person, to yourself. The unedited, unperforming, raw, and real version of yourself that's been waiting backstage while the act played on. You don't need anyone's permission to exist as you are. That permission was always yours. You just forgot. Chapter 3. Love is not what you think it is. Let me ask you something that might unravel everything you believed about love. What if the thing you've been calling love your entire life was never love at all? What if it was something else, something that wore love's clothes, spoke love's language, and mimicked love's warmth? But underneath, it was just fear, holding on for dear life. Most people have never experienced the difference between love and attachment, and that's not their fault. Nobody sits you down at 17 and says, "Hey, before you give your heart away, let me explain what real love actually feels like versus what your nervous system is about to trick you into believing." Nobody gives you that map. So you walk into relationships using the only compass you have, your emotions. And emotions, as beautiful as they are, can be spectacularly unreliable guides. Here's the simplest way I can put it. Attachment says, I need you to stay or I'll fall apart. Love says, I want you to stay, but I'll be okay either way. Feel the difference? One is gripping, the other is giving. One is a cage dressed up as a castle, the other is an open door that someone keeps walking through by choice every single day. Attachment is like standing in the ocean during a storm. The waves crash against you. Every text, every silence, every shift in mood throws you off balance. You're constantly trying to find footing. Your body is tense. Your mind is racing, and you call that passion. You call it intensity. You call it deep connection. But it's not depth. It's drowning. Love, on the other hand, is like standing at the shore on a calm morning. You feel the water brush your feet. You're aware of its power, its vastness. But you're grounded. You're not fighting to survive. You're choosing to be there because the beauty of it fills you without consuming you. When you're attached to someone, your emotional state becomes a mirror of theirs. They smile and you breathe. They pull away and you suffocate. They respond quickly and your whole day brightens. They go quiet and suddenly the world feels hostile. Your happiness becomes a puppet show, and someone else is holding the strings. This is why attached relationships feel so exhausting. You're not just managing your own emotions. You're constantly decoding theirs. You become a detective in your own relationship, analyzing word choices, measuring response times, interpreting silence. Your brain runs like a search engine, always scanning for threats. And the more you scan, the more tired you become. Not physically tired, soul tired. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. Real love doesn't put you in surveillance mode. Real love doesn't ask you to become a code breaker of someone's behavior. It gives you enough security that your mind can rest, that your body can soften, that your attention can return to your own life instead of orbiting someone else's mood like a satellite. Here's a question that separates attachment from love in an instant. Are you staying because you want to, or because leaving terrifies you? Be honest. Not the polished answer you'd give a friend. The raw, unfiltered truth you whisper to yourself at 2 a.m. Because if the primary reason you're holding on is fear, fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of the silence that follows, then you're not in love. You're in captivity, and the prison door isn't even locked. You just believe it is. Attachment also has a cruel trick. It makes unhealthy dynamics feel magnetic. You know that feeling when someone is inconsistent, warm one day, distant the next, and instead of repelling you, it pulls you closer? That's not romance. That's your nervous system recognizing a familiar pattern. It's the same unpredictability you may have experienced growing up. Your body doesn't register it as danger. It registers it as home. And that confusion, mistaking anxiety for attraction, chaos for chemistry, keeps you locked in cycles that drain you. Real love doesn't create that roller coaster. It might even feel boring at first if you're used to the highs and lows. Stability can feel flat when your system is calibrated for drama. But that flatness isn't emptiness. It's peace. And peace, once you learn to recognize it, is infinitely more nourishing than intensity. One of the clearest signs that you're in attachment rather than love is this. You stopped asking whether the relationship is good for you and started asking only how to keep it alive. You've replaced the question, "Does this make me happy?" with, "How do I make them stay?" And that swap is everything, because the moment your only goal becomes preservation, you've already lost yourself. Love asks a braver question. Does this align with who I am becoming? Not who you were, not who they want you to be, who you are becoming, because you are not a fixed object. You are a living, growing, evolving human being, and anything that requires you to freeze in place to keep it is not love. It's a museum exhibit, and you are not meant to be displayed behind glass. Releasing attachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop clinging. It means you learn to hold love the way you hold water, with open hands. The moment you squeeze, it slips through your fingers. But when you hold it gently, it stays. Not because it's trapped, because it wants to. This is the love you deserve, not the gasping, grasping, breath-holding kind, the breathing kind, the kind where your lungs are full and your hands are open and your feet are firmly on your own ground. Chapter 4. The price of disappearing to keep someone close. There's a version of you that nobody sees, not the version that shows up at dinner parties, not the one that sends perfectly crafted messages, not the one that smiles and says, "I'm good," when everything inside is unraveling. I'm talking about the version of you that exists only when you're alone, the one that feels the full weight of how much you've been holding back. Self-abandonment is a strange kind of pain because it doesn't arrive with sirens. It doesn't announce itself. It seeps in slowly, like water through a cracked wall. At first, you don't even notice the damage. You think you're just being flexible, mature, understanding. You think you're choosing your battles wisely. But what you're actually doing is choosing everyone else's comfort over your own existence. It starts small. You don't mention that something bothered you because the timing doesn't feel right. You laugh at a joke that actually stung. You agree to plans you don't want because saying no feels like too much friction. You swallow your opinion because the last time you shared it, the air in the room changed. And each time you do this, you send yourself a message, a quiet, devastating message that says, your feelings are inconvenient, your needs are secondary, your truth is a liability. Imagine building a house. Every morning you remove one brick to give to someone else. Just one. It doesn't seem like much. You tell yourself the structure can handle it. But after months, after years of handing away one brick at a time, you look up and realize there are holes in every wall. The roof sags, the foundation wobbles, and you're standing inside a house that can no longer shelter you from anything. That's what self-abandonment does. It dismantles you in increments so small you don't register the destruction until you're standing in the rubble wondering what happened. The cruelest irony is that you usually abandon yourself to preserve connection. You silence your needs to keep someone close. But the connection you're preserving isn't real, because the person they're connecting with isn't the real you. It's the curated, edited, softened version, the one designed to minimize friction. And you can't be truly loved in disguise. You can be appreciated. You can be tolerated. But you can't be loved for who you are when you're not showing who you are. Self-abandonment also creates a specific kind of exhaustion that's hard to explain. It's not the tiredness you feel after a long day of work. It's the tiredness that comes from performing a role you never auditioned for. It's the fatigue of constant self-monitoring, watching your words, managing your tone, calculating the impact of every sentence before you speak it. You're running two operating systems at once, the external performance and the internal reality. And the gap between them is where burnout lives. Your body knows when you're betraying yourself, even when your mind has rationalized it. That knot in your stomach when you say, "It's fine," but it isn't. That tension in your jaw when you hold back words that need to be spoken. That heaviness in your chest at the end of a day spent being everything to everyone except yourself. These aren't random symptoms. They're receipts. Your body is keeping a detailed account of every moment you chose someone else's comfort over your own truth. Over time, something even more dangerous happens. You start to forget what your truth even is. You've been editing yourself for so long that the original draft is buried. Someone asks you what you want for dinner, and you genuinely don't know. Not because you don't have a preference, but because you've trained yourself to override preferences so consistently that the muscle has atrophied. You've become so skilled at reading what others need that you've lost the ability to read yourself. Breaking this pattern doesn't require a grand gesture. It doesn't require confrontation or drama. It starts with micro-honesty, saying, "Actually, I'd prefer this," when someone asks, pausing before automatically saying yes, allowing 5 seconds of silence instead of rushing to fill the gap with agreement. These moments feel tiny. They're not. They're seismic. Because every time you choose honesty over harmony, even in the smallest way, you lay a new brick back into your own wall. And here's what happens when you stop disappearing. Some people will notice. Some will ask, "Are you okay? You seem different." And what they're really saying is, "You're not performing the way I'm used to." That discomfort isn't your problem to solve. You are not responsible for managing other people's adjustment to your authenticity. The relationships that survive your honesty are the ones worth keeping. The ones that collapse were built on your compliance, not your presence. And a relationship built on compliance is just a transaction with emotions attached. You deserve connections where you don't have to vanish to be welcome, where your voice doesn't have to whisper to be heard, where your needs don't have to apologize for existing. That starts the moment you decide clearly, firmly, compassionately that you will no longer abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable. Chapter 5. The Art of Being Alone Without Breaking. Here's something that might surprise you. The thing you've been running from your entire life, being alone, is the very thing that can set you free. Not loneliness as a life sentence, not isolation as punishment, but solitude as a practice, as a skill, as the quiet arena where you finally learn to stand on your own 2 feet without leaning on someone else's shoulder. Most people don't actually fear being alone. What they fear is what happens inside them when the noise stops. When there's no one to text, no one to call, no notification to check, no drama to distract, just you, sitting in a room with your own thoughts. And for many people, that's the scariest room in the house. Why? Because Solitude strips away every mask you wear. It removes the audience. And without an audience, you come face to face with everything you've been avoiding, the sadness you've been outrunning, the questions you've been drowning out, the truth you've been decorating with distractions. Solitude doesn't create pain. It reveals the pain that was already there, hidden beneath the busyness of being needed by someone else. Think of loneliness like a storm. When the clouds roll in, your first instinct is to run inside, to find shelter in a text, a call, a relationship, anything that puts a roof over the feeling. But what if, instead of running, you stood in it? Not forever, just long enough to realize that the rain won't kill you, that you can get wet and still survive, that the storm passes. It always passes. The first time you sit with loneliness consciously, not because you have no options, but because you choose to, something remarkable happens. Your body panics at first. Your mind races through its contact list, searching for someone to soothe the discomfort. Your fingers itch for your phone. Every cell in your body screams, "Do something! Fix this! Call someone!" But if you stay, if you breathe through that initial wave without obeying the impulse, you discover something nobody told you was there. Stillness. Not emptiness, not void. Stillness. The kind that hums quietly beneath the noise. The kind that feels like coming home after years of traveling. The kind that whispers, "I've been here the whole time. You just never stayed long enough to hear me." That stillness is your own presence, and it's been waiting for you to stop running long enough to meet it. Learning to sit with loneliness is like building a muscle you've never used. The first time you go to the gym, the weights feel impossible. Your arms shake, your body resists, and your mind tells you this isn't for you. But you go back the next day, and the next, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the weight gets lighter. Not because it changed, because you did. The same thing happens with solitude. The first evening alone feels endless. The first weekend without plans feels like exile. But the 10th evening alone feels calm. The 20th feels like luxury, because somewhere between the 1st and the 20th, you stopped interpreting solitude as rejection and started experiencing it as freedom. Here's what nobody advertises about learning to be alone. It makes your relationships exponentially better. When you no longer fear solitude, you stop entering relationships as a refugee fleeing emptiness. You stop treating people as emotional shelters. You stop gripping connections so tightly that you squeeze the life out of them. Instead, you start choosing people the way you choose a window seat on a train. Not because you need the train to move, it's moving anyway, but because the view is beautiful and you'd like company for this stretch of the journey. That's what healthy connection feels like. Two whole people choosing to share the ride. Not two half people desperately clinging to each other, hoping the other one fills the gap. Practical solitude isn't complicated. It's just unfamiliar. Eat a meal alone without scrolling through your phone. Sit in a park for 20 minutes without earbuds. Drive somewhere without turning on a podcast. Walk through your neighborhood and just notice things. The light hitting a building, the sound of wind through trees, the rhythm of your own breathing. These aren't grand spiritual exercises. They're gentle reintroductions to your own company. And as you get comfortable with yourself, you'll notice a shift. The panic fades. The desperate need to fill silence fades. The constant checking, refreshing, hoping for notification fades. What replaces it is something you may not have felt in a long time: sufficiency. The quiet feeling that right here, right now, with nobody else present, you are enough. Not performing enough, not proven enough, just enough, as you are. When loneliness stops being an emergency and starts being a teacher, your entire orientation toward love shifts. You stop seeking love to fill a hole and start seeking love to share a wholeness. You stop asking, "Who will complete me?" and start asking, "Who will complement me?" There is a universe of difference between those two questions. One comes from scarcity. The other comes from strength. So if you're afraid of being alone, good. That fear means there's something on the other side of it that your soul needs to learn. Walk toward it, not recklessly, gently, one quiet evening at a time, one undistracted meal at a time, one breath at a time. The silence won't swallow you. It will introduce you to the one person you've been avoiding your entire life, yourself. Chapter 6. Feeling everything without losing yourself. There's a lie that gets passed around like wisdom, and it sounds like this: strong people don't get emotional. Or its cousin: if you were really over it, you wouldn't still feel this way. These statements have done more damage than most people realize, because they taught you that emotions are evidence of failure, that feeling deeply is a defect, that the goal is to arrive at some bulletproof state where nothing touches you anymore. Let me be very clear about something. That state doesn't exist, and if it did, you wouldn't want it, because a life without feeling is not strength. It's numbness, and numbness isn't peace. It's a different kind of prison. Emotional independence doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop being hijacked by your feelings. There's a massive difference between those two things. One is amputation, the other is mastery. And mastery doesn't require you to shut anything down. It requires you to stay in the room with yourself when every nerve in your body is screaming to run. Think about it like this. Imagine your emotions are weather. Some days are sunny. You feel light, optimistic, connected. Some days are stormy. Anxiety rolls in. Sadness pours. Frustration gusts through you without warning. Now, most people make one of two mistakes with emotional weather. Either they try to control it, forcing sunshine when there's a hurricane inside, or they let it sweep them away entirely, canceling their life every time the clouds gather. Emotional independence is neither. It's learning to be the mountain, not the weather. The weather happens. The storms come and go. But the mountain doesn't move. It doesn't chase the clouds. It doesn't beg for sunshine. It stands. Not rigid, not cold, just rooted. Present through all of it. When you haven't developed this skill, emotions become your boss. A late reply from someone you care about, and suddenly your entire afternoon is derailed. A slight shift in someone's tone, and you're mentally rewriting the entire relationship. One sideways glance, and your confidence evaporates like morning fog. You become a leaf in the wind, responsive to every breeze, every gust, every whisper of change in your environment. And living that way is absolutely exhausting. The shift begins with one deceptively simple practice: the pause. Not a dramatic cinematic pause, just a breath. A half second of space between feeling something and doing something about it. That gap, that tiny, almost imperceptible gap, is where your entire life changes direction. Because without the pause, you react. You send a text you'll regret. You say the thing that escalates. You apologize for something that wasn't your fault just to make the discomfort stop. You over-explain, over-justify, over-give, all because the feeling was so loud that you obeyed it without question. With the pause, you respond. You feel the surge, the tightening chest, the racing mind, the urge to fix or flee, and you let it move through you like a wave. You don't fight it. You don't feed it. You witness it. And in that witnessing, something extraordinary happens. The emotion loses its authority. It becomes information instead of instruction. Anger stops being a command to attack and becomes a signal that a boundary has been crossed. Sadness stops being a verdict of failure and becomes a messenger that something matters to you. Fear stops being a dictator and becomes an advisor, one you can listen to without obeying. This is what it means to let emotions inform your life instead of run it. You don't suppress the feeling. You don't perform the feeling. You hold it the way you'd hold a crying child, with presence, with gentleness, without panic. You say to yourself, I feel this, I see this, and I will decide what to do next. That decision is where your power lives, not in the feeling itself, but in what you choose to do with it. Here's why this matters for love. When you are emotionally dependent, when your inner state is controlled by someone else's behavior, you cannot love freely. Every interaction is loaded. Every silence is a threat. Every conversation is a minefield. You walk through your relationship like a bomb technician, sweating over every wire, terrified that one wrong cut will make everything explode. But when you develop emotional independence, relationships become spacious. You can hear criticism without crumbling. You can handle distance without spiraling. You can sit in disagreement without needing to win. Not because you don't care, but because your sense of self is no longer on the table every time there's friction. This kind of steadiness is magnetic, not in a manipulative way, in a deeply human way. People feel safe around someone who doesn't collapse at every emotional breeze. They trust someone who can hold their own ground without aggression, without withdrawal, without punishment. Your calmness becomes an invitation for honesty, and honesty is the only foundation real love can stand on. Building this muscle takes time. It takes practice. It takes failing and trying again. There will be days when the old reflexes fire before you can catch them. When you send the double text, when you spiral after a short reply, when you abandon your own truth to chase someone else's approval. And that's okay. Mastery isn't perfection. It's awareness. The fact that you notice the pattern, even after you've already repeated it, means the wiring is changing. Slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably. Each time you choose to pause instead of react, you build a new neural pathway. Each time you sit with discomfort instead of outsourcing it to someone else, you strengthen your own foundation. And over time, that foundation becomes something you can trust. Something that holds you when the world shakes. Something that whispers in the middle of every emotional storm. You're okay. You can handle this. Stay. That trust, the trust that you won't abandon yourself no matter what you feel, is the deepest form of security you'll ever know. No person, no relationship, no amount of external reassurance can give you what that trust gives you. Because It doesn't depend on anyone else. It lives inside you, and once you build it, nobody can take it away. Chapter 7. The Trap of Giving Too Much. Let me paint a picture you might recognize. You're the friend who always remembers birthdays, not just remembers, but plans something thoughtful. You're the partner who gives second chances like they're going out of style. You're the one who checks in first, forgives faster, stays longer, loves louder, and you're proud of that. You wear your generosity like a badge. You tell yourself, I'm just someone who gives. That's who I am. But can I be honest with you for a minute? Not to wound you, to free you. Because somewhere behind all that beautiful giving, there's a question you've been avoiding. And the question is this: if I stop giving, will anyone stay? That question, the one hiding behind every casserole you delivered, every late-night conversation you endured while exhausted, every compromise you made while swallowing your own needs. That question reveals what overgiving actually is. It's not generosity, it's insurance. You're not giving because you're full. You're giving because you're afraid that without the giving, you're not enough. Imagine someone standing on a street corner handing out pieces of themselves, literally tearing off little chunks and placing them in people's hands. Their warmth, their energy, their time, their peace. And as they give piece after piece, they get smaller, lighter, less solid. But they keep going because every time they hand a piece away, someone smiles, someone stays, someone says, thank you. And that thank you, that brief moment of being valued, feels like oxygen. Until it doesn't. Until one day you've given away so many pieces that there's barely anything left. And you look around at all the people holding parts of you, and you realize something devastating. Most of them don't even know what they're holding. They didn't ask for it. They didn't treasure it. They just took it because you offered it so freely. This is the trap of overgiving. It creates an illusion of connection built on one-sided investment. And one-sided investment isn't a relationship. It's a subsidy. You're funding the entire emotional operation while the other person contributes nothing. Not because they're cruel, but because you never gave them the chance. You filled every gap before they even noticed it existed. Here's a truth that will liberate you if you let it. When you give without limits, you don't teach people how generous you are. You teach them that access to you requires no effort. You train them to receive without reciprocating, not intentionally, but structurally. You've built a dynamic where your value is measured by your output. And the moment your output slows, when you're tired, sick, overwhelmed, or just empty, the connection falters because it was never built on who you are. It was built on what you provide. The painful math of overgiving looks like this. You give 90%, they give 10%. You tell yourself it's okay because you love differently, because you have more capacity, because they're going through something. But over months, over years, that imbalance doesn't correct itself. It compounds. You become depleted. They become entitled. And resentment, quiet, corrosive resentment, builds in the space between what you give and what you receive. Resentment is the receipt for overgiving. It's the emotional invoice that arrives after you spent too much without ever balancing the books. And resentment doesn't just poison the relationship, it poisons you. It makes you bitter toward the very qualities you used to be proud of. You start hating your own kindness. You start resenting your own compassion. You start wondering if being caring was ever worth it. But the problem was never the caring. The problem was the motive. Giving from love feels nourishing. Giving from fear feels draining. And the difference isn't in the act. It's in the energy behind it. When you give because you genuinely want to, without expectation, without keeping score, it fills you. When you give because you're afraid that stopping will cost you love, it empties you. Learning to give less isn't selfish. It's surgical. It's removing the fear-based giving and keeping the love-based giving. It's asking yourself before every act of generosity, am I doing this because I want to, or because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't? That single question can change the entire landscape of your relationships. When you start giving intentionally, something fascinating happens. Space appears. Space you never knew existed because you were always rushing to fill it. And in that space, people either step forward or step back. Those who step forward, who check on you, who reciprocate, who notice your absence and come looking, those are your people. Those who step back, who only appeared when you were performing your generous routine, let them go. They weren't connected to you. They were connected to the service. Your value was never in what you give. It was always in who you are. And who you are without the overperformance, without the constant proving, without the exhausting generosity, is more than enough. You are allowed to receive. You are allowed to need. You are allowed to sit still and let someone else do the reaching for once. When you stop pouring from an empty cup, you discover something the overgiven never lets you see. The cup itself is beautiful, even empty, even still, even quiet. It doesn't need to be constantly pouring to justify its existence, and neither do you. Chapter 8. Why Setting Limits is the Deepest Act of Love. If I told you that the most loving thing you could ever do for yourself and for the people around you is to say no, would you believe me? Probably not, because somewhere along the way you learned that no is a weapon, that it hurts people, that it breaks bonds. That kind, loving, good people don't say no. They accommodate, they adjust, they make room, they absorb. But here's what nobody told you. A yes that comes from obligation is a lie. And relationships built on lies, even polite, well-intentioned lies, don't last. They corrode from the inside, slowly and silently, until one day someone snaps and nobody understands why. They understand. They just never said anything because they never had boundaries. Think of boundaries like the banks of a river. Without banks, a river isn't a river. It's a flood. It spreads everywhere, damages everything, loses all its power. But with banks, with defined edges, that same water becomes a force. It moves with direction, with purpose, with strength. Your energy works the same way. Without boundaries, it spills into every demand, every expectation, every person who asks for a piece of you. And you wonder why you feel scattered, drained, spread too thin. It's because you are. You're a river without banks. Boundaries are not punishment. They're architecture. They're the structure that allows connection to exist without collapse. They tell people, here's where I am available and here's where I am not. Not with cruelty, not with coldness, just with clarity. The reason boundaries feel so terrifying for many people is because they were raised in environments where having limits was treated as a crime. If you said, "I don't want to," it was met with guilt. If you expressed discomfort, it was met with dismissal. If you pushed back, it was met with withdrawal. So you learned, deeply, cellularly, that setting a boundary means losing love. And that equation, no matter how false it is, runs like background software in your operating system every single day. So when you think about saying, "I need space," your body braces for impact. When you consider saying, "That doesn't work for me," your heart rate spikes. When you imagine saying no, your mind immediately drafts an apology, not because the boundary is wrong, but because your nervous system still believes that limits equal abandonment. This is where you have to separate the feeling from the fact. The feeling says, "If I set this boundary, they'll leave." The fact is, anyone who leaves because you expressed a limit was never staying for you. They were staying for your compliance, and compliance is not connection. Here's something powerful to understand. Boundaries don't push people away. They reveal who was already close and who was just nearby. There's a difference. Close people respect your edges. Nearby people resent them. Close people adjust. Nearby people argue. And when a boundary causes someone to exit your life, that exit isn't your loss. It's your clarity. Setting a boundary doesn't require a speech. It doesn't require justification. It doesn't require a PowerPoint presentation explaining your emotional history. It requires one thing: honesty. Simple, ungarnished honesty. "I'm not available for that. I need to step back. This isn't working for me." These sentences are complete. They don't need footnotes. They don't need approval. They stand on their own because truth always does. The guilt you feel after setting a boundary is not evidence that you did something wrong. It's evidence that you did something new. Guilt is the withdrawal symptom of people-pleasing. It's the emotional hangover from years of saying yes when you meant no. And like any withdrawal, it fades, not immediately, not comfortably, but it fades. And what's on the other side is something far more valuable than the temporary relief of keeping everyone happy. What's on the other side is self-trust. The deep, quiet knowing that you will protect yourself, that you will honor your limits even when it's uncomfortable, that you will not sell your peace for someone else's convenience. Each boundary you set and hold is a deposit into your self-trust account. And over time, that account grows strong enough to carry you through anything. Boundaries also transform how people experience you. When you have clear edges, your presence carries weight. Your yes means something because people know you can say no. Your time becomes valuable because you don't hand it out like flyers on a street corner. Your attention becomes meaningful because it's selective, not automatic. People don't respect what has no edges. They respect what is defined, not harsh, defined. A lighthouse doesn't chase ships. It doesn't beg to be noticed. It simply shines from where it stands, steady and unapologetic. And ships navigate toward it, not because it demanded their attention, but because its clarity made it trustworthy. That's what boundaries do for you. They make you trustworthy. To others, yes, but more importantly, to yourself. When you know you'll honor your own limits, fear shrinks. You stop dreading confrontation because you trust yourself to handle it with grace. You stop fearing rejection because you know your worth isn't up for vote. You stop walking on eggshells because you're ground is solid. Boundaries aren't the opposite of love. They're the infrastructure of it. Without them, love becomes sacrifice. With them, love becomes choice. And love that is chosen freely, consciously, without coercion, is the only kind worth having. So the next time guilt whispers that you're being too much, too rigid, too demanding, remember this. You are not building walls, you are building riverbanks, and the river that flows within them is your life. Direct it wisely, protect it fiercely, and never apologize for giving it the structure it deserves. Chapter 9. The Freedom of Choosing Yourself Without Apology. There's a moment in every person's life, maybe you've already had it, maybe it's happening right now, when you realize that the thing holding you hostage isn't another person. It isn't a bad relationship. It isn't loneliness. It's guilt. Quiet, persistent, shape-shifting guilt that shows up every single time you dare to put yourself first. You cancel plans because you're exhausted, and guilt whispers, they'll think you don't care. You stop replying instantly, and guilt hisses, they'll feel abandoned. You set a boundary, and guilt screams, you're being selfish. You choose rest over rescue, silence over performance, yourself over someone else's expectation, and guilt throws a parade of shame through the center of your chest. And because guilt feels so much like truth, you obey it. You reverse your decision. You call back. You apologize for having needs. You fold yourself back into the shape everyone is comfortable with. And for a moment, the guilt quiets down. But so does something else, your self-respect. Here's what I need you to understand about guilt. Guilt is not a compass, it's an echo. It's the leftover sound of rules you absorbed before you were old enough to question them. Rules like, good people always put others first. Saying no is mean. Having needs makes you a burden. Taking space means you're cold. These rules weren't written by you, they were written for you. By parents, by culture, by religion, by social dynamics that prioritize your obedience over your well-being. And now, every time you break one of those unwritten rules, your nervous system fires an alarm, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something unfamiliar. Guilt is not the voice of morality. It's the voice of conditioning, and conditioning can be rewritten. Think of guilt like a security system installed in your childhood home. Back then, it made sense. The house was small. The threats were real. The alarm kept you safe by keeping you compliant. But you don't live in that house anymore. You've moved. You've grown. You've built a completely different life. And yet the old alarm system is still running, triggered by doors that don't need guarding anymore. Choosing yourself doesn't mean choosing against everyone else. That's the lie guilt tells. That self-care and care for others are opposites. They're not. They're partners. You cannot pour into anyone else's life sustainably if your own well is dry. You cannot show up for others authentically if showing up for yourself is something you skip every single time. Choosing yourself looks like this. It looks like leaving a conversation that drains you without making up an excuse. It looks like taking an afternoon for yourself without calling it lazy. It looks like declining an invitation without writing a 3-paragraph explanation. It looks like saying, I love you, but I need to love myself right now too. These are not acts of cruelty. These are acts of integrity. And yes, Some people will struggle with your shift. People who are used to unlimited access to your energy will feel the change. They'll call you distant. They'll say you've changed. And they're right. You have changed. But changing isn't betrayal. Staying the same while it destroys you, that's the real betrayal. Here's a question that cuts through every guilt spiral. Am I feeling guilty because I caused harm or because I broke an expectation? Most of the time, the answer is the second one. You didn't hurt anyone. You just stopped performing. You just stopped being available on everyone else's terms. And the discomfort that creates isn't yours to manage. It's theirs to process. Other people's emotional responses to your boundaries are not your responsibility. Read that again. Let it land. Because you've been living as if every frown, every sigh, every disappointed silence is a bill you need to pay. It isn't. People are allowed to feel things about your choices, and you're allowed to make those choices anyway. Choosing yourself also means accepting loss. Not every relationship will survive your growth. Not every friendship will tolerate your honesty. Not every dynamic will adjust to the new you. And that's not failure, that's filtration. Life is filtering out what was built on your self-abandonment and making room for what can be built on your wholeness. The losses will sting. Some of them will ache for a long time. You'll miss certain people. You'll wonder if you made the right call. You'll have nights where guilt sits on the edge of your bed and replays every exit you made. But here's what guilt won't tell you in those moments. It won't tell you about the mornings where you wake up lighter, the mornings where your first thought isn't anxiety about someone else's mood, the mornings where you look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. Self-respect is quieter than guilt. It doesn't shout. It doesn't dramatize. It doesn't shake you awake at 3 a.m. with accusations. It just holds. Steadily, silently, it holds. And over time, its quiet presence becomes louder than guilt's noise. Every time you choose yourself without apologizing, self-respect deposits another layer of trust. You start walking differently, speaking differently, deciding differently, not aggressively, just clearly. You stop over-explaining your no. You stop justifying your rest. You stop asking permission to take up space in your own life. And from that place, that grounded, unapologetic, honest place, your love becomes cleaner, not harder, cleaner. Because love given from guilt is heavy, both for you and for the person receiving it. But love given from choice, genuine, free, uncoerced choice, is the lightest, most beautiful thing a human being can offer. And you can only give that kind of love when you've first given yourself the freedom to choose. Chapter 10. When you stop begging, the whole world shifts. It doesn't happen the way you'd expect. There's no fireworks display, no standing ovation, no dramatic moment where music swells and the credits roll. The shift is quieter than that, almost invisible, like the moment just before dawn. The sky changes before anyone notices, and by the time you look up, the darkness is already gone. One morning, you pick up your phone and realize you didn't check it the moment you opened your eyes. You didn't scroll through messages looking for proof that someone was thinking of you. You just woke up, made coffee, listened to the sound of your own morning without needing it to be filled by someone else's voice. Another day, someone doesn't reply for hours, and you notice something strange, your stomach doesn't drop. Your mind doesn't spiral into interpretations. You simply think, they're busy, and you return to your own life, not with forced discipline, not with white-knuckled restraint, with genuine calm, the kind of calm that comes not from convincing yourself you're fine, but from actually being fine. This is what happens when you stop begging for love. Not all at once, but in layers, like peeling off armor you didn't remember putting on. Each layer that comes off reveals something softer underneath, something you thought was gone but was only buried. You stop rehearsing conversations. You stop editing yourself before you speak. You stop scanning people's faces for micro-reactions that might tell you whether you're still wanted. You stop performing your worth and start simply inhabiting it. Not loudly, not proudly, just naturally, like breathing. Your energy changes, and people feel it. Not because you announce it, because you embody it. There's a difference between someone who enters a room looking for validation and someone who enters already complete. The first pulls energy, the second radiates it, and you'll notice this shift reflected in how people treat you, not overnight, but steadily. Some people will lean toward you. They'll feel the groundedness, the clarity, the warmth that comes from someone who isn't performing. They'll trust you more, not because you proved anything, but because authenticity is inherently trustworthy. Your presence will feel like a clearing in a forest, spacious, calm, inviting. People rest in clearings. They breathe easier there. That's what you become when you stop trying so hard. Others will pull away. And this part is important to understand. Their departure is not evidence that you failed. It's evidence that the old dynamic no longer exists. Some people were drawn to your availability, your overfunctioning, your willingness to bend without breaking. When you stop bending, they lose their footing because they were standing on your flexibility, not on solid ground. Let them find their own ground. That's not your job anymore. When you stop begging, you also stop settling, not in a rigid, unrealistic way, in a clear-eyed, self-honoring way. You stop ignoring the signals your body sends when something isn't right. You stop rationalizing behavior that confuses you. You stop decorating red flags with explanations and excuses. You see things as they are, not as you wish they were. And from that honest seeing, you make choices that actually serve your life. Your relationship with time changes too. When you're not spending hours analyzing texts, replaying arguments, strategizing your next move in someone else's emotional chess game, you suddenly have time. Enormous, open, beautiful stretches of time. Time you pour back into your own growth. Your creativity returns. Your ambition reawakens. Your hobbies, the ones you abandoned because love consumed every corner of your calendar, they come back, asking where you've been. You rediscover that love is a part of your life, not the entirety of it. This distinction is everything. When love is your whole identity, losing it feels like death. When love is one beautiful room in a house with many rooms, losing it feels like loss, real, painful, valid loss, but not annihilation. You grieve, you heal, you walk into another room, and life continues richer than before because you refuse to let one room define the whole house. The most profound change, though, isn't external. It's the ceasefire inside you, the war you've been fighting with yourself, the constant questioning, doubting, second-guessing, criticizing, it goes quiet. Not perfectly, not permanently, but the volume drops. The space between self-critical thoughts grows wider, and in that space, something tender appears. Compassion. Not for others. You've always been good at that. Compassion for yourself, for the version of you who tried so hard, who gave so much, who bent and folded and shrank and still kept showing up, hoping this time would be different. That version of you wasn't foolish. That version was brave, misguided, maybe, exhausted, definitely, but brave. And now, a different kind of bravery takes over, the bravery of staying still, the bravery of not chasing, the bravery of trusting that what's meant for you will not require you to lose yourself to keep it. Conclusion: love yourself, not as a slogan, but as a practice. We've traveled a long way together through these pages, and if you've made it here, I want you to know that says something about you. Not everyone is willing to sit with the kind of honesty this conversation demands. Not everyone is ready to look at their patterns, their wounds, their coping mechanisms and say, I see you, and I'm choosing something different now. You did that, and that matters more than you realize. But I don't want to leave you with just understanding. Understanding without action is decoration. It looks nice on the shelf, but it doesn't change your life. So let me leave you with something practical, something you can carry out of this conversation and into your Monday morning, your next relationship, your next moment of doubt. Loving yourself is not a destination. It's not a place you arrive at after enough therapy, enough journaling, enough positive affirmations in the mirror. It's a practice, a daily, imperfect, sometimes messy practice. It's choosing yourself in the micro moments, the moments nobody sees, the moments that don't make it onto social media. It's choosing yourself when you want to send that 10th text, but you put the phone down instead. It's choosing yourself when someone offers you crumbs and your old self wants to call it a meal. It's choosing yourself when guilt rushes in after a boundary and you hold steady anyway. It's choosing yourself when loneliness visits, and instead of panicking, you sit with it like an old acquaintance who's lost their power to frighten you. These moments are small. They're invisible. They will never trend online, but they are the architecture of a life you can be proud of. A life where your peace isn't outsourced, where your worth isn't up for negotiation, where your love isn't a bargaining chip you throw on the table hoping someone will match it. You will still feel pain. Growth doesn't immunize you against heartbreak. You'll still face rejection, disappointment, endings that feel unfair. But you will meet them differently. You'll feel the hurt without drowning in it. You'll face the loss without losing yourself inside it. You'll walk through the storm without forgetting that you are the mountain, not the weather. Some people from your past will not understand the person you're becoming. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you're distant. They'll say they miss the old you, the one who was always available, always accommodating, always agreeable. And when they say that, you'll feel a pull, a gravitational tug toward the familiar role. Resist it, not with anger, with love. Love for who you are now and for who you're still becoming. The relationships that survive. Your transformation will be deeper than anything you've known, because they won't be built on your performance. They'll be built on your presence. And presence, honest, unedited, whole presence, is the rarest gift one human being can offer another. Love will come. Maybe it's already on its way. But when it arrives, it will meet a different version of you. A version who doesn't grip, who doesn't chase, who doesn't beg. A version who stands at the door and says calmly and clearly, "Stay if you choose to, but I'll be here either way, not waiting for you, just being myself." That's freedom, not the freedom of being alone, the freedom of being whole, the freedom of knowing that no matter who comes or goes, you will never again abandon the one person who's been with you through everything, yourself. So here's my final ask, not as a motivational speaker, not as a writer, as someone who genuinely believes in the version of you that's emerging right now, tomorrow morning when you wake up, before you check your phone, before you scroll, before you think about who texted or who didn't, put your hand on your chest, feel your heartbeat, and say quietly, just to yourself, "I'm not begging anymore, I'm choosing me." Not because anyone told you to, because you finally believe you're worth it, and you are. You always were.